When translated from the original Greek word, the term philosophy refers to the love of wisdom. You might recognize names like Aristotle, Plato, and Socrates, as they've laid down the foundation for the way that we study human behaviors and interactions today. In fact, many Greek philosophers would often spend their whole lives searching and studying the meaning of, well, life. And our next guest is no stranger to the world of philosophy. In fact, he studied it in university before eventually becoming a designer.
I guess I'm definitely a pretty contemplative person too, and those questions about the meaning of life and how did we get here and all, those were pretty important questions to me and still are important questions. And so I think philosophy for me was definitely a way that I could kind of explore those and meet other people who are really interested in those questions.
And before he became a UX manager later, Tim spent years teaching himself design from the ground up through countless experiences at companies like Hootsuite and Amazon, as well as agencies including his own. And in the past 6 months, I've had the privilege of working closely with him while learning how to become a better designer and leader at work myself. And so I'm super excited to share with you the first episode of the Minimum Viable podcast and share with you the philosophies of none other than Tim Kolke.
So if I go back to high school age, I started getting interested in design as part of an architecture class. And so my brother is a really good visual designer, a visual artist. And he was just, when he was born, he could just kind of draw. As far as back as I can remember, you would give him a pen or a pencil and he would sit there, and after a little while, he would do something that looked amazing. And then when I would draw, it was always stick figures and it just looked terrible compared to what he did. And so I always just figured that I didn't really have design capabilities or design skills. And then, it was kind of when I went into the architecture class and I started doing more of the schematic and technical sort of the more of the the bigger picture and conceptual drawing, that I realized that I actually really enjoyed it and was kind of a natural fit for me. And so that was kind of the first time that I realized that I was actually interested in design. And even though I don't think I would have called it design back then, I didn't really, it was just architecture, just drawing. That's kind of high school age. If we go back even earlier, I can go sort of all the way back. I was born in Ontario. My parents and my family moved out to British Columbia when I was about 5. And so we followed my grandparents out here, who decided that they wanted to retire out in Harrison because they had been to Harrison once in the summer and really enjoyed their time at the lake. And so they, I guess that's just kind of how they did it back then. There wasn't really a way to kind of research an area as much as we do now. So they just moved out to Harrison, bought a house, and they ended up not liking it because of the rainy, wet winters and stuff. But our family realized that we wanted to be close to their grandparents, and so we ended up moving out to BC as well. For me, high school was really about having fun. I wasn't one of those kids that was doing homework every night. I was pretty much more of having fun every night kind of thing. And so I did pay for that eventually, because when I got out of high school, I was trying to get into university programs and I wasn't able to get directly into university program. And so I ended up going into a community college first and kind of going through that path. And I worked a few different jobs kind of in between high school and university as well. I actually framed houses for a little while, kind of followed in my dad's footsteps. And I did that for about a year. And then I also worked in supportive care for a little while. And I actually did that right through university too. And so working in kind of a high needs situation with adults that just weren't able to do a lot for themselves. And that was a pretty interesting work experience as well.
Yeah, I was kind of curious because you mentioned that in high school you liked a lot of these architecture classes. And I think given that your father was a house builder, it kind of goes hand in hand with that. What I find interesting is that instead of going into architecture naturally, it seemed like in 2003, you went to Simon Fraser University and you studied philosophy there. So I was kind of just wondering what was the intention behind that, and was that something that you intentionally went into?
Yeah, it's a good question. So basically, I went into university without having a really big career plan. I just knew that yeah, after framing houses for a little while and working with my hands for a bit, I realized that it didn't really have a good long-term trajectory for a career and probably wasn't the best option for me. And so yeah, I should probably mention that I was married by this time too. And so both, yeah, my wife and I at the time were just kind of like looking at our career options, and both of us had just decided to kind of go back to university at the same time. So that actually worked pretty well. And then yeah, I just started taking classes, and I remember taking a philosophy class and just really liking it. And so that led to another philosophy class and then another one. And then pretty soon I was doing my major in philosophy, and I didn't really know where it was going. I thought that teaching was always going to be sort of a backup plan. And then, yeah, I ended up just kind of, I guess, following my heart a little bit with that. And I guess I'm definitely a pretty like contemplative person too, and those questions about like the meaning of life and like how did we get here and all, like those were like pretty important questions to me and still are important questions. And so I think philosophy for me was definitely like a way that I could kind of explore those and meet other people who are like really interested in those questions. And yeah.
Right. Because like I think after university, you also ended up going to the University of London, right? To do your PhD in philosophy.
Yeah.
Which I thought was like really interesting just because you you really like chased down that path. I guess with that in mind, what were you trying to get out of going to university?
Yeah. So I think once again, like it was sort of I didn't have a really solid like end goal. I knew that I wanted to potentially teach philosophy. I also had a pretty realistic view at that time of working in academics because when I was in my undergraduate, I actually got a chance to be part of a hiring committee for bringing on a new professor at SFU. And that really opened my eyes because I just saw how there were like, we had probably 150 applicants who had applied. And these were people that came from like Ivy League schools, they had published. And we were literally like putting them aside, like, you know, and I just figured that, yeah, there's no way that I'm going to compete in the long run with the folks at this level, at the academic level. And so that was actually a really good experience because it kind of like helped me set my expectations around, am I going to get like a research job in philosophy? It was pretty, like, it's a pretty slim chance. That being said, like I thought that maybe just studying within philosophy would open up into something eventually. And I think part of it too was just kind of getting some funding. And so when I got through my bachelor's degree, I ended up getting a scholarship for master's. And so I was like, okay, well, I could either start looking for work now, or else I can do my master's degree and kind of get paid to do it. So I was like, yeah, I might as well do that. And so I kind of had the same approach going into my PhD. I was like, if I can get funded and if I can pretty much do this at least for free, then I'll continue along the path. Otherwise, I might start looking at something else.
And what were you, I guess when you go into a doctoral program, you kind of have like a thesis in mind. What thesis did you go in with?
Yeah, so I was studying political philosophy at the time. And it's been a while since I've thought about this, but the topic is public reason. That's the sort of the label of the topic. There's a famous philosopher named John Rawls. And so I was basically looking at some of his work and just looking at different ways that you could sort of interpret some of his theories, try to test them out a little bit and see if they actually worked in real life. And so that was kind of my approach.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I guess like after studying philosophy for a number of years, I'm kind of curious whether or not you had any philosophies that you kind of take to heart, or like anything that you've learned along the process that you still kind of like look back at today.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, I mean, I definitely found there's a lot of, like, especially when you start in philosophy in university, you'll study a lot about epistemology and about like, what do we know? What can we know? How certain is our knowledge? And so I found that going through that process of studying epistemology was really good for me personally, because it helps you understand like how certain your claims are and your beliefs are. And you kind of, I think a lot of people who study philosophy go through this stage where it's like, you think that you know everything going into it, and then all of a sudden you realize that you don't know much. And then you kind of build back up to the point where you're like, okay, well, there's certain things that there's certain knowledge that I can trust. There's a certain level of humility that I maybe need with my beliefs. And I think I think it helps in a lot of ways. And so that was probably a good aspect of it for me.
Right. Yeah. Cause I think it naturally lends itself to kind of talking about like the human condition. And I know like as a UX designer and like somebody who's currently a UX manager, it's kind of like, I guess, something that kind of goes hand in hand. And as an interesting segue into your design career, after your PhD program, you ended up starting a design studio with your brother, right? Back in 2006, I believe. So I was kind of curious, what led you to go down that path?
Yeah. So that was once again, it wasn't totally planned out. And so when I was studying for my PhD, I was running out of money, and my brother had just finished his design program at Emily Carr. And so he actually was looking for work. He wasn't finding anything right away. And kind of a friend of a friend approached him and asked if he could build them a website. And so my brother wanted to take the project on, but he's definitely more on the like visual side of things. I've always been a little bit more technical. And so he actually approached me and said, hey, like this person needs a website. Like I can design what it looks like, but do you want to see if you can try to build it? And I was like, sure, why not? I've never tried it before, but let's see what we can do. And I think the person had specifically asked for a Flash website. So this is going back a little.
A lot of pretty dated technologies now. But that's interesting because you were working with him for a number of years. I believe it was like 6 years that you guys were working together.
Yeah.
What kind of like projects do you remember from just that time? Or like what was like the working style like between you two?
Yeah. So our working style was great. I mean, my brother and I are really good buds. And one of the good things about us working together is we got to spend quite a bit of time. And I know a lot of siblings probably can't work together, but for us, it just kind of worked. And we're still really good buds even after shutting down the company. So that was awesome. Basically what happened was we kind of just got busy by accident. So we did the first website and then another website came along. And then at one point, my brother was just like, hey, I need a business partner. And he was like, are you going to do your PhD or do you want to go into business with me? And so that's kind of when I made my pivot from academics into going into business.
Oh, interesting. And do you remember any like particular projects that were kind of like interesting or almost kind of like a turning stone for you? Because I imagine that when you first started, it had to kind of almost not feel so natural, I guess, in a way. And you kind of had to figure things out because obviously you didn't have any prior design training before that, right?
Yeah.
Like how did you study design through your projects?
Yeah. So I'm definitely a self-learner. And so basically it was just talking to people, reading, scouring the web, Googling. Yeah, a lot of reading, a lot of like trial and error, and just kind of being in the trenches. Like I remember we were doing some branding work back then. And I remember this one time we actually had some clients that were up in Kelowna. And so my brother and I were like scrambling to get this brand presentation put together. And then we had to like hop in the car and drive out to Kelowna to deliver it in person. And so I remember like, a couple of days before, like just like picking up books on like how to build a brand and like, what does it mean? And how do you present it and all that kind of stuff. And so we just kind of like, it was sort of out of necessity. We had to deliver something. And so we just kind of did what it took to.
Right. So you kind of like learned by doing.
Learned by doing. Yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah.
So you worked in the kind of like agency and studio space for a number of years, even after even after you stopped working with your brother. I understand that in 2012, you actually ended up working at another studio called Domain 7, right?
Yeah.
And then you worked there for a number of years?
Yeah, about 3 years, yeah.
Okay. And then you moved into FCV Interactive, which was also another design studio.
Yeah.
So I guess what things about the agency space that you find very appealing to you? Because you've had to obviously like the job that you were doing to do it for a number of years, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I think agency work can be quite exciting. Part of the reason is that you're just on new projects all the time, and you're constantly faced with fresh challenges. You get to learn a lot about different businesses, which is really cool. I've always really enjoyed that kind of initial stage where you get to meet with the clients and you get to learn about their business, and often you'll go out for lunch, and your whole goal at that point is just kind of getting to know as much about the customer as you possibly can. And then from there, it's kind of like, coming up with those like big, like blue sky thinking. A lot of times people will hire agencies because they want some like new ideas that they haven't thought of, or just be able to do something quickly sometimes that they are not able to do in-house because they don't have the capacity to do it, capabilities.
Right. Is there any project that you think stands out when you think back to your time at the agencies?
Yeah. So, I mean, and this goes back to one of our earliest clients, actually, Kiss and Makeup. You may have heard of them. They're a Vancouver-based fashion boutique. They started out with just a single store in West Vancouver, in Park Royal Mall, actually, and then they branched out. They have a few stores now, and they have like a good sort of like online shopping presence. But when they first started, it was just they were kind of like us, like they were just two sisters, and we were two brothers, and they were just had their first store going, and we were helping them build their like first e-commerce offerings, and we were helping them with like their store displays and pretty much like any sort of like design work that they needed. And that was just a really fun kind of working relationship, and also like because you could see the impact on the business on kind of like a day-to-day. And then you also just become kind of like really good friends after a while. Like we went to Christmas parties together, and we just end up having a lot of fun too. And so,
you built up a lot of, I guess, a network across a bunch of different industries in the city.
Yeah.
That's really awesome. Yeah. And I guess this leads me to my next question, because after being in the agency space so much, you actually decided to move into more product-based companies. I believe in 2017, you started off with your first product-based role at Hootsuite. As a senior product designer, I believe.
Yeah.
So what was going through your mind when you were making that switch between going from an agency to a product?
Yeah. I mean, definitely part of it has to do with lifestyle and just kind of, work-life balance. Like agencies, there is a rumor that people tend to work sort of longer hours, and your workflow goes kind of like that a little bit more. Like you'll be on a big project for a while, you work a lot of hours. Sometimes you'll have some downtime, but it's pretty rare. And so I think, part of it was just wanting like a little bit more of a sort of like consistent sort of like work-life balance. I think part of it too is a lot of people that come out of agency into product will say things like it's nice to see things through a little bit more, because usually on the agency side you will come up with an idea for something, you'll create an MVP, you'll push it out the door, and then you're kind of done. Like you don't really see what happens with that project over the long run. And so I think kind of like earlier, so when my brother and I were closing down our company, I had a meeting with I can't remember the name of the individual right now, but provided me with like this awesome piece of advice, because I was trying to figure out like what to do after being a small business owner, because you are used to wearing so many hats, and it's hard to like move into like a position at another company, which oftentimes they want you to fill a specific role. And so the piece of advice was basically think of where you want to get to long term, and then just start making sideways moves. Like if you want to get into like product design, but you're just right now you've run a small agency, and so you know how to kind of do everything, but you don't know enough about product design specifically to actually be a product designer. And so for me, it was sort of that, like every agency that I worked in, I was getting closer and closer to this kind of like UX product design role that I think when I was starting out, I didn't even know that it was going to be that great of a fit for me, but it just kind of, that was more what my kind of transition was like. So when I went from FCV into Hootsuite, it was a really natural transition, because I'd already been working in UX specifically for a couple of years, but more on the agency side, and so that was the first time working with a product team. So
and so I imagine one of the bigger changes is that, like you said, obviously when you're working in an agency, the projects are a lot shorter in span, and I guess like they're more big picture, almost conceptualizations of things that would eventually turn out to be full products. Whereas when you work at a more product-based company, you're working more on the granular level with features that kind of go through different life cycles, and then you can actually see it through. Aside from just the ways of working, I guess, like what else was different about working? Because I imagine that Hootsuite at the time was probably bigger than the agencies that you've worked at in terms of people.
So it's interesting, the design team where I'd just come from at FCV was about the same size as the design team at Hootsuite. Like we, possibly even larger. Like, I think at FCV, we probably had about 7 or 8 UX designers. There was also like a full visual design team. And I think there were about 6 or 7 people on that team. Plus we had a dedicated like user research team that had, I think, 3 user researchers. And we also had service designers. So we had I think we had 2 or 3 people who were like dedicated service designers. So it was quite a good like design organization. I would say the biggest difference, though, is just the way that we worked with engineering. It was definitely more waterfall. Like, we would get our designs to a certain point, clients would sign off, we would pass it off to our developers, who would then create that kind of like MVP or whatever, and then they would hand the code over at some point in most cases, and we'd be done.
Okay. And you were at Hootsuite for 3 years.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you remember about your time over there? Like, I guess to kind of generalize it a little bit, is there anything that kind of like sticks out in your head about what made you stay for so long, I guess?
Yeah, you bet. Yeah. I mean, the first thing that pops into my mind for sure is the jam room. Like, it was just, Hootsuite was, I mean, I'm sure it still is, like, just like a really great like culture and environment to work in. The company was very much about, like lifestyle and just kind of giving people a creative space, which is kind of what the jam room was all about. And so I think, as a result of being part of the team and forming a small band with some of the people on the team, it just has created these like really great friendships that I will hopefully have my whole life. Like, we still actually jam probably like once a month with the Hootsuite friends, and so that's definitely one aspect of it. I think the other part of it for me was just, it was really like my like introduction to product. Like, how does agile like really work, and like not just on paper, but like how does design actually work in a dev environment that's trying to be agile, but also recognizes that pure agile, it's very rare, and it doesn't usually happen the way that we think it does. And so I'm learning about like how to work with product managers and working within a larger like design team too. For sure, yeah.
So naturally, I guess, going in kind of like the progression that you were already headed, you ended up going to a much bigger company. I guess after that, you went to Amazon, where you were a senior UX designer at that point. Just before we even go into talking about the experience, I guess, what would you say was the biggest change in like your responsibilities going from a product designer to a UX designer
at Amazon? Yeah. So something that I find with the label is that it's pretty much the same. It's the same job, but just different labels. I think when I first started at Hootsuite, my title was actually UX designer. And then at some point, I think it was about after a year that I was there, our team decided just as a group that we wanted to rename ourselves as the product design group. And so our jobs didn't really change. It was just I think it's more of a mentality that we were wanting to present ourselves within the organization as providing that level of value of like design at the product level, as opposed to just improving usability. And so I would say at Amazon, eventually they may call their UX people product designers. Like, I did actually see within Amazon, there were a few people that had product design as their title, which I thought was interesting. It's not super consistent, or it's not. Amazon is really a bottom-up type of organization. And so they don't actually enforce a lot of things top-down, which is pretty interesting given the size of their company. Yeah. So, I mean, if my manager had opened up a role that said product designer instead of UX, it would have been called product.
And so at Amazon, you were working, I read an article that you were working on a project called Amazon Location, which is more on the development-facing side of things, right?
Yeah, so I worked on the AWS side of things, which is Amazon Web Services. So it had nothing to do with the e-commerce or the consumer platform.
And I think at the time, because Amazon obviously a very big company, but you said before in a previous conversation we've had that it was a smaller team, right, that you were working with?
Yeah. So I joined as part of a basically like a sort of like a tiger team that was spun up within AWS to dream up and create a brand new service that hadn't been created before. And so that's kind of like Amazon's style of how they do innovation. every year, there's a number of product managers who pitch ideas to some of the top execs within AWS. If your idea gets green lighted, you get a budget for a year or so, and you get to build a little team. And then if you can get to the point where you can start generating revenue, then you'll continue getting budget and continue getting to grow that team.
What would you say was the biggest difference between working at Hootsuite and Amazon for you?
Yeah, so Amazon definitely felt like very much like a startup. They do say that when you're going into Amazon, I guess depending on the type of team that you're working on too. Like if you're working on a more established area of the product, then it'll probably feel a little bit more like a regular kind of like design org. But when you start one of those little teams that's spinning up a new service, yeah, you're the only. So I was the only UX person, and I did everything from like trying to shape the direction of the product and the APIs, doing user research, user interviews, and wireframing, right up to like the visual design within the interface.
And then you were at Amazon for a year and a half, I believe. Were you doing that whole like all of those roles within that whole time, or was there a point where you switched projects?
Nope. Yeah, it was that one. Yeah, same role the whole time. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. It sounds like a lot of definitely a lot of responsibilities, and obviously like segueing into where you are now as a UX manager at Later. Obviously, I think there's kind of like a different mentality when you think about the responsibilities, and we'll get into it a bit later about your article on giving away leadership. But I guess I wanted to kind of, now that you become a UX manager, I think one thing that kind of comes to mind for me is kind of when I started looking into your career as a designer. You started off doing your own thing with your brother, kind of in an entrepreneurial kind of spirit, and then worked in the studio space for a bit, eventually going into product-based companies, and then now in a managerial position. I'd like to imagine that if you were to look at the way that a designer learns about all of the different roles that you can get within the industry, you probably want to start off with agencies just so that you have a little bit more, I guess, a little bit more exposure to all of the different products, and I guess like work in just a faster paced environment. And I think when you're younger, it definitely helps to have more of that, the energy there, I guess. So would you have changed anything throughout your career? Like if you were to be able to like switch the different roles, what would you have changed differently?
Yeah, absolutely. My brother and I have actually chatted about this quite a bit. I would definitely have worked in agency first before starting our own agency. That's for sure. And so there's a couple of reasons. One is just that we had to learn a lot of lessons the hard way. Like if we had both spent a couple of years in one of the established agencies already, we would have learned a lot of like the just best practices around even like figuring out how to do those like discovery interviews with clients when you first meet clients. Like we just kind of did that by trial and error. But once you're in an agency, you'll realize that they have templates and they've got, there's a certain structure to doing those interviews, and there's a lot of things that we could have picked up. The other thing is that it's actually very difficult to sell your services when you don't have big agency experience. And so you'll notice that a lot of people that go and start their own agencies come from a big agency, and they'll usually have like one or two like key like clients to kind of help them kick off their new business. And so yeah, we didn't have, like a portfolio that had like Nike and or like big brands, right? And so it was a bit harder for us to get work sometimes.
Mm-hmm. So basically being able to build off of reputation and kind of like that brand name trust in a way before starting into the agency. And do you think like going from agency to product based was the right choice as well?
Yeah. And I think especially for me personally, I think in general, I would say it's probably good to do a bit of both. Like even if you were to start in product, I think it's good to do a little bit of agency. I also think it's good to do a little bit of like big corp. Like I learned so much at Amazon, and working in that sort of, like a high pressure environment, you really get tested, and it's, So I don't think I would change any of that. Maybe a little, yeah.
And then now that you're a UX manager later, so you've been here for about half a year. I just looked it up just to make sure that I got the dates correct, but you started on August 3rd. Yeah. So it's been roughly basically 6 months at this point. How have you been liking it so far?
Yeah, well, Later is very likable company. And so, yeah, I mean, in terms of just like the culture and the values, like it's definitely, and I'm not saying this just to like, bump up later or anything, but it's really like, this is like one of the best like environments that I've worked on and I think it really goes back to the founders because they're very personable people who had values that that they care a lot about and wanted to make sure that they become part of the culture as the company moves forward. And so I think that just from that side of things alone, like I'm really enjoying my time at Later. And then also it was just the right time in my career also to transition from being individual contributor to managing.
Yeah, so, I was just going to ask about that because I imagine that the responsibilities that you take are quite different, especially when it comes to actually doing like the technical work. What do you miss about that? What do you miss about those that kind of time, and what do you kind of like now that you're in a managerial position?
Yeah, you bet. So I think what I miss is being able to just kind of like lock myself away at a coffee shop for a day and just put my headphones on and get into some sort of a problem, like trying to solve a user problem. And more like I definitely always liked working at the conceptual level more than the detailed interaction design. So I think like taking on something that was a little bit more of a challenging like workflow that needed some research. I really enjoyed getting into those problems. I do miss that a little bit now. I find that I still get quite a bit of that just as a result of just chatting with other people that are more hands-on with those types of challenges right now, but I still get to be part of it. So I actually don't feel like I'm missing that much. And I think for me, like I don't know like when it's a good time to kind of make the switch from IC to manager. I know people make that switch at kind of different points in their career, and not everybody does make the switch. I think for me, like I realized that I was just having more and more of a desire to like help other people kind of do well in their roles, and it was something that I recognized in myself as I was kind of looking at roles to apply to, and there were like principal design roles that were taking on bigger like and more complex challenges, and then there were more managerial roles that were like help this team of people kind of meet their goals and help people kind of achieve what they want to do in their careers. And I just found that to be more exciting at this time in my life. And so I figured I was just like, just go for it and give it a try. So, yeah.
So I think this segues perfectly into kind of like the next thing that I wanted to talk about. So I know that you're a pretty active writer. You've written for a number of publications over the years. Like I think at some point you wrote for the HuffPost. I saw that. You've written a number of articles for Smashing Magazine as well. And I guess nowadays I find a lot of your publications on Medium. Is that kind of like where you put a lot of your thoughts down these days too?
Yeah, for sure. I'm definitely a journaler. And so I just kind of naturally write my thoughts down. And so it's actually, something that I'm working at getting more in the practice of, and being a manager especially, is just writing down some of those things and putting them up on Medium, especially, anything that I think might be helpful to other people.
Your latest article was titled Leadership, Giving It Away.
Yeah. So
I kind of wanted to give you a moment to kind of just touch on that a little bit, because I read through the article and I definitely see a lot of the stuff that you're talking about. Like it happens a lot at our workplace as well, and I recognize that you have a certain leadership style. Was just wondering if you wanted to touch on that for a bit.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess the gist of the article I guess when I've been thinking about the kind of leader that I want to be and the kind of management style that I want to have, it kind of it goes back to like some of my skateboarding days actually, and like just being part of like skateboarding groups where they were like youth skateboarding groups where they would sometimes have like a weekly event or something, and I just remember being part of the groups and just how these the groups were really like run and led by other skaters that were just like my age. But they were not like the main people who were kind of like behind everything. There was always these like older skaters who were just there to support and kind of like, and so yeah, I found that, I guess, yeah, reflecting on that now, just thinking like how energizing that was for us at that age, because it kind of felt like, hey, like this is our thing. Like we get to kind of do what we want with it. And it was nice to know that there was these kind of like older skaters kind of like hanging around, you know, like they're cool, right? And they had life experience, and you could chat with them about things. But and so yeah, I've been really wanting to kind of take that and apply it to kind of like what I'm doing now with my team, and the kind of, yeah, thinking about the kind of manager that I want to be. And so yeah, part of it is just trying to like work with people on my team, figure out what they're passionate about, figure out what types of responsibility they would like to take on, and then kind of get out of the way and just like, you know, be as much of a support as I can. And if it turns out that there's not that much for me to do because everyone's like doing things and is super engaged and excited, then I feel like my job's like, I'm been successful, right? Like that's kind of where I want to go. So,
Yeah. And I think naturally what that allows us to do is kind of trickle down the power in a little bit. And I don't mean power in the sense of like, I guess in a traditional way, but it's almost kind of like you can really feel the influence from an individual contributor level as well. Because I know personally with working with you directly, it's been quite empowering. And I think one of the things that I'm pretty proud of that we were able to accomplish within the last half a year was this kind of hiring process and kind of hiring philosophy about building a team from the ground up. We talked about this a while ago about basically the reason why we're hiring for more junior level roles right now is that we can build up leadership opportunities for the current designers right now. Yeah, I just kind of wanted to get your overall thoughts on that and see whether or not that's something that you think other companies should be doing as well.
Yeah. So I don't think other companies should do it.
Yeah.
But that's more of a selfish reason.
Oh, interesting.
And it's just because we've had like so many good applicants, I think, at that more like junior level. Like we've had, just for example, like we've had a couple of positions open. We put up a posting also for sort of like a more like intermediate to senior. We've had very few applicants, and I know that it's a very tough market right now, or it's a very scarce market for like intermediate to seniors. We've had a lot of applicants at the junior level, and but just a lot of like really good applicants. And so I think, so I mean, I kind of tongue in cheek, like the reason why, I mean, yeah, I think I think there's a lot of opportunity to kind of build in that way. And I think even with our team, like I've just kind of like seen how like Joey, like you've been very involved in the hiring process, and you've really just taken a lead role in that, and other people on the team too have gotten really, really involved and want to kind of be involved in mentoring the more junior people that we bring on the team. And so I think it's it seems to like bring an energy to our team, which is really great.
I think it's also kind of like allowed for us to kind of visualize the career ladder better in a way. I think before, especially when you're working with a smaller design team, I think that natural progression isn't as obvious as when you're working in like a big company. So I think being able to kind of formulate those kind of strategies together when our team is kind of still in its foundations is like pretty important. That being said, kind of like more on the hiring side of things, especially because I feel like we've been in hiring mode for a number of months already. Especially when it comes to being a manager and reviewing applicants. Like you mentioned, we have a lot of applications. And I feel like at some days it's just like it almost seems like we can't even go through that much at a time. In a space that is highly competitive and like, especially like compared to when it was before, what do you think, as opposed to me asking you what advice would you give junior designers, what are some things that you think make junior designers stand out when it comes to reviewing applications?
Yeah, for sure. So I think a big part of it is probably understanding the company that you're applying at. So at Later, we're very interested in character and kind of who you are as a person as well. And so when you are applying to a company that does value those type of things, I would say, yeah, like make sure your application has that side of your personality represented as well, like not just your successes in UX or your career successes. Like, yeah, make sure that you present your kind of like your whole self as a person is definitely one of them. I would say, yeah, like think about big picture thinking and detailed interaction. Like we definitely want to see that, you can do both. Think like conceptually problem solve and also do the detailed interaction design type of work. So yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Well, those are most of the questions that I've had for you. I just wanted to close off by asking two more questions. What are some of the things that you're looking forward to the most about this year? Just because obviously it's a new year, first episode of the podcast, and I just kind of wanted to see what your thoughts are.
Yeah, you bet. So I would say probably the number one thing for me right now, and this is just part of being a people manager, is that I see that there's a lot of energy in the team already, and I'm excited to see that continue to grow. And we're going to be growing our team by a few people in the really near future. And so I'm also really looking forward to seeing like people that are currently on our team, like sort of starting to step into mentorship roles and seeing the new people just really come alive on our team as well. So that's probably the biggest. Yeah.
And is there anything that you want to kind of put out to the world, any announcements or anything that you want our listeners to know about?
I mean, I don't know how exciting this is, but one thing that we are working on as a team is our career path. And so we've been actually looking at like examples of a lot of other companies and wanting to provide something for our team that is going to help the folks on our team kind of know that they're at a good level across the industry, including some of the bigger shops like Amazon and Microsoft and that side of things. And so I think once we get to a point with our team where we're comfortable with it, I think that's something that we'd be happy to share and let other companies use it as well. So that's one thing that you can probably expect to see from us. I know our team is probably wanting to get a little bit more involved in the local community too. So we've chatted about possibly doing some sort of a design event within the Vancouver area community this year. So that would be cool if that happened too.
Yeah, once restrictions open up, hopefully.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Tim. Thank you for the time today. And, really enjoyed our chat.
Yeah, thank you. Me too.
Hey, this is Joey, and I just wanted to give a huge thank you to Tim and you for tuning in to the very first episode of the Minimum Viable podcast. It's been a huge focus of mine for the past few months, so I just wanted to thank Later and everyone who supported me in bringing this to life. If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We have new episodes like this one coming out very soon that I'm equally as excited to share with you all. And in the meantime, share it around with your network, leave a comment, or send me questions at Joey Limmena. I'd be more than happy to talk about this episode and any future ones we have planned out.